Hello and welcome to the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. We're going to have a great session today on inoculating employees against social engineering threats. So social engineering, from what I've seen, has really kind of overtaken phishing in some ways as the greatest threat. I mean, there'll always be attempts to launch malware through phishing, but it's really become quite an amazing amount of threats that we're seeing through social engineering. So the structure of these sessions, as you may know if you've been on these before, is that we use the chat. And fortunately, I think I remember to turn on the chat. Maybe the first thing we'll do actually is have people just enter where they're coming in from today. And I think it's always fun and interesting to see where we are. We've got Chris from Calgary. Good to see you, Chris. Got Deepesh. I think, Deepesh from Austin. Jennifer, and then myself. We've got Tyler. We'll have a couple more, I'm sure, who've said they're going to join us as well. So really glad everybody could make it. We're going to use that chat session or chat facility so that people can make comments on things that we're talking about or ask questions, and we'll discuss them live. We were going to have one other panelist. I was really excited, Dr. Michelle Moore. She'll join us again, but she's from California in the academic area, and she's got lots of great stuff on security awareness and social engineering. So we'll get her back again in time for this, for another one. So we'll use the chat. Whenever you have a question, just enter that. Let's just dive in. Social engineering. I know Chris, who's on the call, has, I think, literally written a book on social engineering. So I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. But in my sort of modest definition, social engineering is the practice of using emotional triggers to trick somebody into doing something they would otherwise not do, if they really knew what the intent was or the actual consequences of their actions. Anybody have anything I missed here, or things that you think are really important for everyone to know about social engineering before we dive into some of the other conceptual things? Typically, I'll just do a few little slides and discussion, and then we'll go into some questions. So, hey, Matt, good to see you from Cincinnati. So Tyler, do you have any thoughts on the definition of social engineering or anything just in general that you'd like to say about it?
Man, I think it is profoundly underestimated, or maybe more so. And I think I don't mean to sound elitist, because I think that, regardless of where you are in the industry, you are just as, likely, it's possible for anybody. But I think a lot of it has to do with, I guess, overestimating our ability to judge these things and separate them from legitimate emails, texts, calls, etc., and not understanding precisely how good these people are at manipulating human psychology. Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's manipulation.
Exactly. And the one thing I think that a lot of people don't realize is it's not that you have to be terribly good at it. It's that it just happens to be a weakness that we all have when you get to a certain topic or a certain belief or something that you touch on. It triggers some emotions that just cause us to completely bypass everything we know. And that's what we have to teach people, right? And we'll get onto some stories in a minute. I've got a favorite one that just illustrates that whole thing. Is like, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you can be tricked. So,
and I think that's a key in differentiating it. Like when people discuss it, because I think that we run the risk of, you always want to teach people in a positive way. Not, I saw you post about this on your feed about phishing, simulations and embarrassment, right? That's not the goal here, but it really is. They cast such a wide net, and the phishing, email or call, whatever that got you that one time, it's not, that might not have got you the week before, the day before, the day after.
But timing is everything.
I've seen times where it's like, someone got a call And it was, I mean, we can share stories later, but it was, someone that claimed to be their grandson who was, in trouble, and they had just, had some conversation the day before that sort of tracked with that.
Yep.
And, it's your grandson. You're not thinking, is my grandson, is this real?
Yep.
I mean, they prey on our emotions, and that's just a part of being human. And as far as avoiding it, it's just practice and being
Yeah.
aware. But like
Yep.
anything, you're always vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think everybody probably on this call understands, to some extent what social engineering is, how important it is, how much of a threat it is. Something that you'll see me talk about a lot in many of my presentations is a risk management model that I think is simple enough for everybody to understand. And it just sort of sets the context for how we can talk about these things in a way that's practical, right? And this comes from my background working in risk management, risk assessments within the federal government here in Canada. And they always kind of had a simple formula, which was risk is proportional to the asset value or the impact of whatever it is that you're trying to protect, times the vulnerability level of whatever safeguards you've got in place, times the threat level or capability of the actor. And each of those things has, more detailed mathematical or quantitative kinds of things that you can assess and then come up with some ratings. So it really becomes a quantitative analysis. But you end up with dozens or hundreds of line items of here's a risk, here's a risk, here's a risk that are each different scenarios. What we want to focus on when it comes to social engineering is the human vulnerability side, because as you can see, when your asset values go up, the risk goes up. When the technical threats go up, your risk goes up. When your human vulnerabilities go up, then the risk goes up. And the vulnerabilities are inversely related to the safeguards. So whatever protections, controls, whatever you want to call them, whatever is in place there, they are strengthening our protection, but at the same time, it's reducing vulnerability. So every time we talk about vulnerability, it's kind of you're thinking in terms of the inverse of the strength of whatever safeguard is there. So when we look at human vulnerabilities, we see lots of them, right? And it's an interesting thing. I have a bit of a problem psychologically or principally around calling whatever we're doing in security awareness, creating a human firewall. Because a human firewall, it's a nice analogy. It's quick. It's easy for people to understand. We're putting that block between the threat and the assets. But what we don't realize is that firewalls are kind of set and forget, right? You set a rule and it will always obey that rule. Doesn't mean you can't get around it or do other things to break it. But at least if you set a rule in a firewall, it's supposed to work all the time. When you teach people to do something, as you said, Tyler, it might change from day to day whether they actually are able to do that. So it's one kind of problem I have with calling it the human firewall. But all this to say, we do have to look at what are the most likely situations or the most dangerous weaknesses that people may have or exhibit in different situations. And when you're at work, you're susceptible to different things than when you're at home. So just like to put that model out there around how we are going to talk about human vulnerabilities in social engineering. So I've talked about this model before, and we can certainly come back to it and put it in context. But I sort of wanted to expand a little bit on this around phishing and say, phishing is really a type of social engineering, but it's been so, focused on that, we don't have to really explain it that much. Similarly, though, smishing or SMS phishing, voice conversations, or any kinds of messages can be also used in social engineering. One of the things I think that is really important for us to realize is how many different emotions an attacker has at their disposal. And it's one of the things that makes them seem so powerful, right? It's like, oh, they could do anything. Well, all they have to do is find an emotion that you care about something deeply, and then just start turning it around. So, we've got all these different types of emotions. There probably isn't an emotion that you can experience that can't be in some way exploited, or at least attempted to be exploited. So we have a comment from Chris. love to hear from Chris. So I'll just read it off. I just gave a presentation in Hungary via Zoom about how youth are being targeted by cyber criminals. My topic addressed what we must change, that we must change the way we are attempting to educate users of technology. The one way fits all doesn't work for different organizations due to their familiarity or non-familiarity and desire to adopt or engage in technology. For sure, everybody's got different levels of abilities. And as a result, we can be trying to help people become more cyber safe, but they may not have any comprehension of what we're talking about. Absolutely, Chris. Thanks for that comment.
Yeah, Chris, that's an expert way of putting it. I've just from personal experience, working in this industry and talking to someone like, say, my grandparents or elderly people that, actually, some of them have a decent understanding of technology. Some of them, just got a computer for the first time in 70 years. And the way you have to educate based on that is, of course, totally different. And the threats, generally speaking, I mean, you can see the emotions on the screen. They're incredibly broad, but they apply to all of us.
Yeah.
But the way you have to convey that has to be applicable, to them, and it has to make sense within their framework. Even if they, understand the words you're saying, it has to make sense in an actionable way. So I could probably sit down with somebody that doesn't, know all the different terms and all this kind of stuff for a couple hours and go over all this technical stuff. But in practicality, does that translate to something usable? That when they get the call, they get the text, they get the email, they're gonna go, that light bulb's gonna go off, So it's knowing your audience, and I think it's also, trying to do it from a position of more of a peer. You want people to ask questions on these kind of things and feel comfortable asking questions. The saying that there's no stupid questions, I think, really goes far here for security awareness.
Yep.
Because the moment you have someone afraid to ask, of being embarrassed, that's being shot in the foot, right out the gate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good time to now talk about some of the instances where we've seen this to illustrate it. And I'm going to paste a link to a Psychology Today article. We actually covered this in the Shared Security Show podcast a few months ago because it's such an interesting story. Psychology Today actually documented a case where a psychotherapist, I guess it was a certified therapist, got a phone call and it was a scam, but she was convinced that she was going to lose her license to practice if she didn't go to the store, buy gift cards and send money. And you'll see it in the article. She talks about it was almost like being in a trance. They were so good at just manipulating based on her knowledge that she should have been able to spot it. She almost knew what's happening, but in fact, wasn't able to stop it. So if a psychologist who's trained in all this stuff can't spot it, and you start to think, what hope do we have, right? But it's really just a good story for illustrating to everybody how easy it can be to be fooled. And you can see that we've got lots of examples of the kinds of emotions that are being used. Hopefully you guys can still see me.
You were just cutting out there, Scott.
Oh yeah. I'm being told my internet is unstable, so I'm not sure what's going on in my
for me, it went silent there for a little bit.
Yeah.
Right when you ended your note on the psychologist getting duped.
Yeah, it's just like, what hope do we have, right? If these guys
exactly.
can be,
somebody has a doctorate or PhD in this field, I mean, they expertly understand exactly the underlying behavior that's being taken advantage of. And then, they get duped. And I read a post from a colleague who was this close to, getting caught in one of these scams. And it was, they were disarmed, especially because you think of phishing and social engineering as an email thing, or as a text thing more recently. But when you get a personal call and these people do research, they know your family. I mean, there's a lot of data available on us.
Yes. Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
put that sense, that urgency on it to where, the example, that article, I have it up right now. It's like, oh, I'm going to lose my license. This is my livelihood. Like, you know, what if this is real and I ignore it, the consequences are bad. If this is fake and I ignore it, the consequences are also bad.
Yeah. So the attackers know, what, or they will, as you said, do some research to find out which emotion you're most likely to, trigger on. But I think what it means for us is that we have to teach people to spot that emotion. It's not so much about spotting the specifics of an attack. It's when you get that feeling like you have to do this thing or else something bad's going to happen. That's the time when you have to just tell them, step back for a minute. And I think they even said in the article, like she actually for a while had to hang up on the call so she could get in the car or whatever. And she ended up talking to somebody about what she was doing. And they said, stop and think. And it wasn't until she realized like it was all a big scam. Like
it's interesting you say the stop and think, because that is one of the things that they understand. I have done a lot of research. I've got to see a little bit of the inside baseball and how a lot of these things work. We've seen some leaks out of these groups, and that's one of the things when they have you on the phone.
Yeah.
And often, right, they'll try and get you to go buy gift cards or Western Union,
yes,
Bitcoin, something that's
untraceable.
Untraceable, but more importantly, non-refundable. You can't do a chargeback, and it's always no, leave me on the phone with you when you go to the store.
Yeah.
Okay, don't tell them you're sending friends and family, because if you tell them you're sending it to me at Amazon, they're going to charge you a business fee. So you just got to tell them you're sending it to your grandkids. And they understand that the moment you break contact, you give that person a second to go, hold up, wait, let me connect these dots. And even more so, they can confer with someone else, because these people actually selectively prey on, they'll look in obituaries and try and find widows and widowers, because they understand that person probably doesn't have someone to ping that off of and go, hey, wait, this is awry. This isn't correct, because they're not under that pressure, and they're able to offer, another perspective.
Yeah. Great point. And we've got some comments too. Maybe we can cover. Chris mentioned they're appealing to your interest, not your intellect. So it doesn't matter how smart you are, right? And Depeche says, emotional triggers turn off the logic part of your brain. So it makes it difficult to think on the spot. And that's absolutely true. And it reminds me of another thing. I was actually listening to a sales training DVD set, or a CD set years ago. And the sales coach was being recorded in front of a live class, and you could hear everybody talking. And somebody put up their hand and they said, that technique you're just telling us about, says the customers are going to spot it every time. Like, if I ask them and I keep asking them questions, they're going to say, why are you asking me so many questions? And so the coach was just brilliant. He turned it around and he led him through this little thing, and he kept doing it over and over again. And everybody in the class was laughing because they saw that the coach was literally
the script.
He flipped the script. It's just so interesting.
It really, I think it is interesting you draw the parallel with cells, just because the scamming side, I don't want to say they're the same. They're not. But they both are kind of the art of understanding human emotion and guiding that towards a desired outcome. Because something like, I believe I was reading some research, 90+ % of people say they make their decisions purely logically, like a machine would.
Yeah, right.
But then when you look at the social science studies, the psychology studies, it's actually almost the exact inverse. We make decisions emotionally.
Oh, yeah.
And then we come up with logic to track with
exactly. You reverse engineer it, right? Like exactly. I'm sure we all chose our spouses very logically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's move on a little bit for some more discussion in a different area. And we talked a little bit about research, right? And one of the things that attackers are really good at right now is leveraging tools for gathering information about their targets. And so I put a few up here that I know of, and we can talk about instances of how these things have been leveraged. But if you have other places where you've seen, attackers are finding information about their targets, I'd love to hear from you guys on this. But number one is Google. Like whatever your digital footprint, or what they call it, or your digital shadow of what you leave behind on the internet can be leveraged, right? I mean, just do a vanity search on yourself and see what's out there, and that's what people can find on Google. There are certainly, Google hacks, they call them, little keyword or filters that they can do searches on to zero in on stuff, images of you, or any files that have, spreadsheets or stuff like that, records, those things they can search for are pretty easily locatable if you have put them out there. And so I actually applaud people who say, well, I don't go on Facebook, I don't trust it, right? And it's just a matter of gut feel that there's something there that they just don't want to end up in trouble. And I think it's a healthy skepticism, of the value of those kinds of things, even as much as you're putting yourself sort of out of sync with social norms.
Yeah, I think with social media, I mean, I just, of course, I'm 23, so I grew up in the age of social media, and I don't, there's some good that comes out of it. The only one for me that, I made the decision to make, publicly available is, of course, LinkedIn, because that has, a benefit. But you would be amazed. And prior, I actually got ransomware, about 2 years ago. And if you tried to use my computer, you'd be pretty annoyed. I mean, it's got a hardcore firewall. It's locked down. And it was even before this attack, but it wasn't until that happened to me that I went and just I tried to build a dossier on myself. And it was amazing to me, for someone that was actually very privacy conscious in the first place, how much information I could get, not from one source, because with one source, we're pretty cognizant, but there's to go in and manually change privacy settings and to clean up data on me took weeks of effort.
Yeah.
And the old fashioned rule of whatever you put on the internet stays there forever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. And these businesses monetize your data. That's the business model.
Yeah.
So, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. That was always
right.
told to me.
That's right. On the business side, most often, I think LinkedIn is probably the place that an attacker will go to find out information that will help them, to understand who you're connected to, who you might be working for. There's a paid version of LinkedIn that will actually show you more information about people, and what the other people in their organization are at different levels, who are close to them. So you could easily pick, somebody who's at a senior level to somebody within an organization and use that as the basis of a persona to attack somebody. And any other things that you're interested in or concerned about that you post about can be used, to post or to try and approach you. And I think most of the people on the call here understand that, but I just wanted to make sure people, had some good resources they can use to teach their own staff or family or associates.
And for anybody looking for something, I can drop a link in the comments section. But a really good resource that I use is a website called privacyguides.com. You follow all the rules on there. You're not on social media or using Google at all. And they're great alternatives to all these things. But I always recommend, once you go in there, clean it up, and just have some basic hygiene things in mind, you reduce that attack surface a lot. And, part of it is, it's like having a dog at your house versus your neighbor in terms of getting broken into. Can they still break into your house? Yes. But when they're looking for an easy target, if you got a dog, they may not know how big it is. My dog's 60 pounds, but he sounds like a bigger dog, and just that much harder. They follow the path of least resistance. But between LinkedIn, they're able to get your whole professional network, and from Facebook, they can figure out who your family members are. And
Could-
Chris, that website is privacyguides.com. I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat. It's a wonderful resource. I mean, you could spend a lot of time on there. The only other thing I'd recommend is for any of you guys that like Reddit, if you go to the subreddit, OISNT, open source intelligence. OSINT, pardon. And just look at all the open source intelligence tools.
Oh, there's tons of tools.
You'll have your mind blown.
I was going to say, there are, I can't remember the name of them now, but anyway, it'll come to me. But yeah, I've done this. I've actually been hired to do social engineering testing. And that's one thing I was going to ask about as well as, how many people have actually done social engineering tests within their organization. What we mean by that is, test customer service. I was hired to test the customer service people in an organization who literally had access to the keys to the kingdom when it came to changing customer configuration information that impacted, their websites and stuff like that. And so, I was hired to try and get them to make changes without the proper process being followed. And fortunately, I wasn't able to. But it's a straightforward process, except if you're not a natural actor or liar. So I found it kind of hard to do. So those are things that we really want to be aware of. The other thing is data brokers. And, I mentioned paid version of LinkedIn gets the attackers a lot more information. There's so much data about you that you wouldn't believe if you did a search on data brokers in general. It's all the information that is collected ostensibly with your permission, but you probably didn't read the terms and conditions of whatever website is collecting it. And the worst offender in this area is Facebook, because they collect so much data. In fact, Facebook has profiles on people before you even join as a member. And so as soon as you join and they recognize an email or a phone number from data they've already collected, they just have basically exploded your profile, and they know so much more about you. And that data can be purchased by attackers so that they can create phishing. The idea is it's supposed to be available to marketers who can sell stuff to you in a more targeted way, but it's just as useful to attackers. Next topic I wanted to ask was, what are the tips and methods most helpful in having employees learn to stop and think? We just talked about that, the whole idea of your brain getting hijacked in certain situations. So I just wanted to touch on this idea of the techniques that we can use to tell people, if it doesn't feel right, you should just stop for a moment and think about it. Is it part of your job at all to divulge information about certain things, where an attacker may just be trying to elicit information by saying that they are executive that you don't know? So anytime it doesn't feel right, I think is what we need to be telling people, rather than just saying be suspicious of these things. That doesn't really mean that much. It's when you talk about their emotions, right?
Is your spidey sense tingling?
Yeah, exactly.
I say that jokingly, but
that'd be a great meme or a great poster, right?
Yeah.
Use your spidey senses.
But I mean, really, it seems almost every time I've talked to, I really do enjoy this part of my position a lot, is that I get to, deal with people that have dealt with this firsthand, sort of on the front lines. And almost every time that, especially when someone's been duped, they've sent money or whatever, they were like, I had a feeling, but they kept hammering it in.
Yeah.
They put the pressure on, but then they know how to relieve it, because if you get too overwhelmed, people, they can have a reaction, or, this is too much for me, I'm going to hang up. You need to do this now. You're going to lose your license, whatever. But then it's like, don't worry, like, it's going to be okay. All you have to do, you need to pay the transfer fee. You're late on your license fee. You just go to Western Union. Yeah. And our licensing office is out of the country, and you don't want to pay the fees. So say, it's to a friend, and then you're going to send it to this person in, Bangladesh or,
Yeah, yeah,
wherever. And if you were told that under normal circumstances, and you and a couple people could, crowdsource an opinion on it, you go, well, let's take a step back and look at this, and you'd spot it real quick. But you got to think about the stakes. That psychology one's a great one, because what's the worst case scenario if it is real?
Mhm.
What's worse, getting duped or hacked, or losing your profession, your ability to make money, your license. And
Yeah,
I don't think people are consciously weighing that in their head. I don't think they're like, oh, well, if this is a scam, with cost benefit analysis.
yeah,
But I do think that's a subconscious process that goes on, to where we go to the worst case scenario. And when
yeah.
they present that worst case scenario very clearly to you,
Yep.
that you're going to lose your license, or I've seen examples where your grandson is in Mexico and he's in jail and needs bail money.
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
we're emotional creatures, every
Yeah,
single
for
one of
sure.
us.
The other
And
thing I was going to say is that the third bullet here is I find a lot of times people just don't think they're a target. They don't think an attacker would go to that much trouble to learn about them, right? And as a result, when they are approached with somebody that has a bit of information about them that nobody else would know, then it's easier for them to fall victim. So I think if we teach people that attackers will spend the time to learn about you, and you are a potential stepping stone to a bigger target. Those are the two logical things, I guess, we can tell people to try and help prepare them, so that they can recognize something and say, you know what, I should stop and think about this one.
Scott, I think that's probably one of the things that I think, I think that the first 2 points, the urgency, the funny, are hit on the most, but that know something,
Mm-hmm.
but to me, it really drills down to the, what I've heard this from a lot of the smaller businesses I work with, why would we be a target? We got 15 employees. We're not,
Yep.
there's not a ton of cash flow. Why would they target us? And that in and of itself negates the first two.
Yeah.
If you don't even think you're a target, the funny and the urgency, that goes out the window.
Yeah.
And I one example I'd say is, a lot of times with hacks, ransomware, these kind of things, they're disseminated passively.
Yeah.
Another thing is, you have to understand that sometimes, oftentimes these hackers, these scammers aren't based where you're based. Sometimes they're in
Yes.
countries, we've seen North Korea is more on the hacking side, but you'll see ones in India and some of these other, Bangladesh, these kinds of countries where, the options for these people that are doing the scams in terms of earning income is a lot less than you would think. So you go, oh, why would they do these phishing emails, these scams? They barely ever work. So they're putting in all these hours for it to pay off, once or twice a month. We got to understand that, it doesn't cost them $3,000 a month to rent an apartment there.
Yeah.
The wage they need to get for that to be a payoff, just very practically speaking,
Yep.
is less than you think they would need. So that means that whatever, measly amount of money you think that you could lose is a lot more to somebody else.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. Love that. Cool. So let's move on to our next question, which is, what are the best ways to assess employee resistance to attacks? Can we measure it, right? So we know that in the phishing world, we do a lot of live phishing tests, and everybody knows my views on live phishing tests by now. But there are also those live social engineering attacks that I mentioned before, or live social engineering tests, I should say, where you're testing people not just through phishing, but through those phone calls that I was hired to do with the customer service group. I think that makes sense for people who have a specific, vulnerability that we want to make sure doesn't get exploited. I don't think it makes sense to do just in general over an organization and say, show me where you could break in. Maybe it would make sense, but I think it's money better spent if you're actually focusing it on a particular area of risk in the organization and the people who work in that area. All right. Any other thoughts, Tyler, in the area of how you can assess people's vulnerability?
I had an idea. I thought, maybe gamified sort of training.
You think so? Oh, that's
I think that I don't know if anybody's done it yet.
yeah.
No, I think this is pretty clear. I think, you know, we've hit on this a lot. I think
Yeah.
there's limited, you know, use of phishing simulations. I think they do have a place.
Yeah.
The social engineering stuff is a little bit, it's much harder, much more difficult. It might have a place. I think, like everything, like we talked about last week, you got to tailor these to the organization. But the kind of stuff, and Scott, you've told me some stories about like the USB one that, you know, are interesting and hilarious. But those I think can come in handy. I think this just is a piece of the pie of the greater security awareness, you know, whole.
Yeah.
But
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to set me up that way.
Teed you up for Click Armor.
While we're talking about assessment, you know, this is something that we do specialize in. So I just wanted to take a moment to do a shameless plug, and then I'm going to ask Christopher to join us on the panel because he's got some great ideas. But when you think about how we can assess somebody's vulnerability, you have to put it in context. And so we have what we call social scenarios, where people can actually be put into an immersive situation with some context. And then we give them a chance to, you know, make a choice to get more information. And so they can ask or, you know, maybe ask a question or maybe do inquire on something else, and then go off and find out the answer to that. And eventually you have to make a decision on whether you're going to trust this person or not. And if it's the wrong answer, you get a bit of feedback. If it's the right answer, then you get some points and some fun. But the idea here is that its ability to put things in context is something that you just don't see anywhere else. And you can make use of this type of scenario-based simulation that allows us to really give people a feel for what they're going to see in the real world. So that's all I wanted to show you. I think because we have this in the product and we put people through 4 or 5 of these simulated scenarios in a course, that is something we can then look at and say, you know what, they got, you know, a very high percentage on this particular course. And it gives us a much better sense of assurance, which is a word I like to use coming from the risk management world. And anyway, so that's the end of my little pitch on the social engineering course with Click Armor. But hey, Christopher, welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Not too bad. Where are you? You're in Calgary, is that right?
I am at the moment, yes.
Well, that's good, because we were missing a guy from Calgary today. AJ Lease is normally here from Calgary. He's got a company called Cybersecurity, and he does incident response stuff. So he couldn't make it today, but we're glad to have our regularly scheduled Calgary representation.
There you go.
So yeah, what kind of thoughts did this trigger for you, Chris?
I think the one thing that it's surprising, when I give my presentations and the one I just gave in Hungary, it's amazing how many times people hear what they shouldn't do or what they do, and we just keep doing it. And you ask yourself, where is the mental block? And I've been working on some research for about 3 years, and I addressed it in this presentation in Hungary. I come back to this point about you can't use one size fits all. And I sent a chat off. I don't know how many people saw it, but it dawned on me when I was doing a presentation to a major company in Canada, and somebody asked about smishing. So I started talking about it. I didn't know what it was. And then I looked, and there was a young man about 20 looking down at his phone, typing away furiously, kind of looked up at me, rolled his eyes, looked very bored. And there was a couple in their 70s, and they're staring at me like deer looking into headlights. Like, what am I talking about? Is this a medical procedure or what? And that happened about 3.5 years ago. And since then, I've been working with one of the professors that I continue to work with at Boston University, where I got my master's. And we have been progressively moving forward in our research on examining the generational differences of how we, what technology we've grown up with, how we perceive, if there's any perceived usefulness or advantage in using it, and the challenges of accepting it. So somebody who is a baby boomer versus someone who's a Gen Alpha or a Gen Z or Gen Z, it's night and day, because the kids born today, I always say there's a new appendage on their body. It's called a cell phone. And the Pew research that I came up with, the data for this presentation a week and a bit ago, shows that the 31% of parents in the US are giving their children an electronic device, be it a tablet or a phone, prior to the age of 2.
Whoa.
Where it's starting, 31%.
Wow.
1%.
Is that to chew on, or what do they do with them?
Well, actually, here's the scary part. I'll share something I thought was fascinating. My wife and I went out for dinner about 2 months ago, and there was a 2-year-old and a newborn. We happened to converse briefly with them. The 2-year-old had a cell phone, and she was sitting there working away, taking pictures all over the place. But all of a sudden, I saw my wife smiling, and I looked around, and this absolutely cute little 2-year-old was looking at my wife and taking her picture. And she would smile at my wife and look down at her phone, look at the picture, and show it to her father. And they told us she was 2 years old. But then she got doing something else on there in the restaurant. And, this joke about I reached out to my tech support group, but my 5-year-old was in bed, so I had to wait till he got up. Right.
That's funny.
And getting back to the point, how do you educate young people today in a positive, productive way about being cyber safe and cyber secure without them taking it as an attack on their freedom to use these devices? We must make sure they have these devices. They fall behind the rest of the world in their development. But they've also found that too much time spent on a digital device actually inhibits development of certain parts of brain matter that typically we would have gone through. Anybody over probably 30 or 40 would have gone through, and it doesn't develop in kids. So I don't know how parents and teachers and everybody else can necessarily productively look at a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old or 6-year-old and say you're spending too much time on there, you shouldn't be doing this. But one of the things I'll close with was I suggested to parents that if they see their children doing something, look at it and say, oh, what's that? Show me. And sound very positive, to your point, Tyler, using positive approaches, not negative. Oh, show me what you're doing, et cetera. And that way you get to see what the kids are doing. And I think if you start that at an early enough age, they won't resent you asking as they get older. And there'll be less child issues with nefarious characters. And to your point, Scott, Facebook and everybody, they know where you are, when you're on it, what you're doing, what you like. And that information's all shared on the dark net.
Yeah.
But to protect our youth, I think parents really have to take on a new way of teaching younger people who, as opposed to someone like myself, who was a baby boomer. I have a computer background too, and that helped. But if I didn't have that, my adoption of technology to what's available today would be much slower and much more guarded than a youngster today who says, well, all my friends use it.
Yeah.
I don't understand the ramifications of using it.
Chris, I think your example, I just wanted to I'm 23. So you bring up the example of the 20-year-old looking at their phone. I recently graduated from university. I went to Santa Clara University, and that's right in Silicon Valley. So we're in the tech sector. We had people from Facebook, all these kind of companies that really, they're data mining companies. And a family friend, or one of my cousin's girlfriends, was on the analytics AI data side of Google, and she was not supposed to do this. And mind you, I was very privacy conscious at the time, not like I am now. And I was like, you guys don't have anything on me. I don't use Google. And she's like, do you want me to pull up your info? And I was like, a little stomach drops. It's like, oh crap. Oh yeah, sure, do it. I had made my bed at that point. I had to back it up, and she wouldn't show other people. She's like, you don't want other people to see this. And she pulls it up, and I read it, and the inferences. My response was verbatim. How do they know that? I barely know that about myself. Yeah. And I was, it's crazy. And to connect that in one of my ethics class, my teacher was asking about, the availability of data. We've grown up with technology. How do we feel about privacy? Are we okay with that agreement that you have no privacy, you're tracked, all this kind of stuff, all your info's out there, but you get these cool, addictive, social media things. And I was the only student, or me and one other student, and the professor were the only three out of 30 or 40 kids that objected to that. And I think that's where you see, it seems that people that didn't grow up with this are much less okay. They might have a much greater sense of privacy, to whereas, people that have grown up with this, like, shoot, I mean, I didn't when I was 2, when I was young, we didn't have tablets, that kind of stuff. But to grow up with that totally changes your perspective. And likewise, you have to change your approach for those sorts of things. And we can get into, you bring up the developmental delays from social media and that kind of stuff. I just saw something that was a study on how social media use just affected, attention and motivation. And, we've seen rising, ADHD, that kind of stuff. And they said that the maximum time for someone before age 25, brain development ceases to not atrophy your ability to keep attention. So not even to maintain, just to not degrade, was 60 minutes a day on a smartphone. 60 minutes. I mean, that's a very brief amount of time. And we got kids that are spending 8, 9, 10 hours. And, just I mean, we could go on the rant about phone use and how I don't think it's necessarily a positive, but you have to approach it with these things in mind when you're speaking to that audience, because the way you put it, it's an appendage to kids my age and to kids even younger. Yeah. I'm amazed. It's like, we can't go to dinner and have these people off their phone. It's like, I'm right in front of you, but if you approach it from the point of view, like, you're being tracked, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. What does a kid or a teenager want to do? I mean, right.
One last comment, Scott, before you wrap up.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Chris.
I was sitting in a restaurant a while ago, and this young couple were sitting there, and both of them were buried in their phones. My wife and I, we like to go for our romantic dinners and chat and have a wonderful time and a glass of wine, whatever. And these two, their heads are down. One of them not even looking up, saying, "Did you get that? Did you get that?"
They're texting.
They didn't look at them and ask. They said, "Did you get what I just sent you?"
Amazing. It's a strange world. All right. So yeah, we are going to try and wrap it up now. I'm going to use the same graphic I used last time, and AJ thought I was trying to capture the sun. I was really just trying to see if people had any thoughts on what they got out of this session. What was the most helpful thing that you actually saw or heard about in the session today. Love to hear your thoughts if you can type it in the chat. And while we're doing that, I'm going to talk about our future sessions. So we've made this a habit to do it every other Wednesday. So the next one will be October 19th at 2 p.m. I'm going to have to check LinkedIn every day and make sure it still says 2 p.m. I'm pretty sure that it changed it on me somehow. I'm not sure why, but we had a whole bunch of people that started at 1 p.m. today, or thought it was starting. So I apologize. That's why we didn't have as many people on as we normally would. But what I'd like to do is, if people would think about these potential topics. Next topic is going to be on working from home. In 2 weeks, we'll talk about various aspects of securing people's home environments. And the rest are kind of up in the air in terms of order. So anybody have any preferences they'd like to see us talk about of these or any others, feel free to just enter it in the chat, and we will start to put together a little bit of a priority on them. I'm really seriously looking at creating a platform that we can do these sessions on. We can have the calendar within the platform and the chat and forums. We can post more stuff about each session, just sort of keep it more of a community rather than the way we're doing it right now, which has worked okay, but I think we're maybe not getting as much value out of all this good stuff as we could if we had a centralized portal. So I'm going to look into doing that for next time, or sometime soon anyway. Steven says, Steven says he's admittedly naive about how much info is available through Ascent. Love to see an anonymized example of what might exist on an average target. That's a really good point. I think I haven't done it lately, but there are people who have, oh yeah, Tyler's recommendation on looking at the tools. I was just, in terms of what Steven's asking is, you know, getting a realistic view of what a profile looks like for somebody. And I know that my podcasting co-host, Tom Eston, who I'm going to be on with in about 4 minutes for our next episode, actually has done that. He's requested a dump of just what Facebook has on him. And it was like, I don't know how many gigabytes of text. So it's just unfathomable how much detail there is that you can't get. But if you do a search online for something like personal information dump example or something like that, you'll probably find some people who are posting what has been found in those exports of data.
And
so
that, I just wanted to add I sent that the subreddit there. You know, you have to browse through. There is a wiki you can see on there that has some good tools. One general tool I put in the comments is that Have I Been Pwned website. Just a great place. I use that as an example for people that are in that mindset. You know, a lot of younger people actually, or, you know,
yeah, it's a great eye opener as a starting
point. It's the I'm not a target type, you know, thing. And then you put the email in there. It's, you know, and it says, oh, I showed this to my parents. Your data for this email has been used in 11 different breaches. And I found one of the paste bins. You know, it had 200,000 emails and password combos, but you Command F, find it, and it's like, it's right here. It's on paste bin. I mean, this is, anybody can access it.
Yeah.
And then you go and show them the dark web, which people, you know, it's all spooky, but it's very easy. And then it's like, whoa, you can pay a hacker like $1,000 to, you know,
sometimes not even that much. Sometimes it's only $20 and they can get what they need. So yeah,
exactly.
So just to wrap up, just want to let people know that you can always find out, you can find the recordings of these sessions. I'll have this one out probably in 3 or 4 days over the weekend. And we have the YouTube channel for ClickArmor where all these things exist, as well as some other videos that I've done as well. And feel free to share these, especially this is, I think, very shareable content. And connect with myself, with Tyler, and anyone else who you have seen on here. And just a final pitch for ClickArmor. We are the first fully gamified awareness training, assessment, and engagement platform that builds employee resilience and a strong corporate culture. So I'm going to plan to do more office hours live, basically just doing demos and answering questions. But I'll usually post that on LinkedIn or Twitter when I'm going to do that. So that's the end of today's session. Really appreciate you all joining, and thanks very much, Chris, for joining us on the panel on short notice.
Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hopefully you'll come back again for another one.
Sure. Love to. Thanks.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. We will talk to you next time.